Well, welcome to the Young Republicans meeting. Today is October 6th, 2021. It's about 8:05 p.m. and we're having a discussion tonight with Republican candidate for the 6th District of Oregon, the newly formed 6th District of Oregon. Angela Plowhead is our guest today, and I grabbed this straight from her website, so if any of it's wrong, not on me. Angela is the first person in her immediate family not to only graduate college with a bachelor's degree, but to go on to earn a doctorate in clinical psychology from George Fox University. Angela believes without the freedoms and opportunities offered by growing up in America, she wouldn't have been able to achieve such heights. Protecting these freedoms to empower all people is the utmost importance to Angela and Oregonians. Angela is a down-to-earth Oregonian, no-nonsense, clinical psychologist, a veteran, a small business owner who has committed her career to serving veterans, seniors, and people with disabilities. She's been married for over 25 years and is a mother of two. And I say that because every political speech they always talk about, oh, I couldn't do it without my family. So I thought I'd add that in there because I'm sure it's something that they are feeling also. So I will let you opine a little bit about your background, because it's doing research, you realize that it's so varied and it's so it's really impressive. So I'd love to hear sort of the yellow brick road of how you got to today.
Sure. So I grew up in Texas. I was very poor. I didn't live in a stick-built house until I was almost 12 years old. So for me, life wasn't easy growing up. And when I mean easy, I mean, I didn't come from an advantaged background. There were times where, food insecurity was something that was very real for me. I remember at one point when I was probably 8 or 9, when I came home and there was literally nothing in the refrigerator. And the only thing that was in the pantry was a can of hominy and a can of pumpkin pie filling. And that was it. So, I know what it's like to be poor, but to not ever have lost hope or a feeling that I wasn't capable or wasn't able to do something more in my life. From the time I was 3 years old, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. That changed a little bit as to what type of doctor I wanted to be, but that didn't change the idea that there were things in life that I wanted to accomplish and that I was very capable of doing them. And, even if there were other people in my sphere of influence, teachers, in 4th grade, I had a teacher who would throw my homework assignments away and say I didn't complete them. Things like that. It didn't impact who I felt I could be or the things I felt I could do in life. And so when that idea of who I wanted to be got challenged a little bit when I first went to college, and what had happened was that my roommate's parents, who were a medical doctor and a nurse, didn't know anything about her life. But I knew I wanted to have a family, and so that challenged me a little bit in what road I wanted to go down to become a doctor. And so while I figured that out and changed majors a few times, I really had to do a lot of searching. And I felt led to join the military. Prior to that time, I had never had an interest in joining the military. And so, can you guys hear me? Because it froze on my end.
Yeah, we gotcha.
Okay. So that ended up leading me to a very interesting 4 years of my life. So I joined the military, was assigned to be an intelligence analyst, and met my husband 6 weeks after I joined, and we married very quickly after that. And so that definitely gave me a different view into the world and into what happens outside of our nation and outside of freedom. it gave me a view into the world of people that are living in communist countries and what it is that their life looks like. And so when it was really frightening to me that people were willing to accept that when we have known nothing but freedom in our nation. And to see that people were so willing to say, yeah, let's bring in socialism. Yeah, let's bring in communism. That's okay. And not only is it okay, but it's a good thing. And I was like, are you out of your mind? It's not a good thing at all. Like, these are the scary things that I witnessed in people that went from having a good quality of life to then having no quality of life at all, where you had to struggle to find food. You really had to get good at being extremely resourceful, because you went from being what used to be a middle class to now being in the lowest class, because there are only two in that type of society. You have the elites, and you have the people that have nothing. There's really no in between. And that our nation, who has known such prosperity because of the constitutional freedoms that we have, being not only okay with, but willingly seeking and trying to bring that into our nation, was something that I'm not willing to accept. I'm not willing to accept it for me, and I'm not willing to accept it for my children or my children's children. And so that's why I decided to step up and say, no, this isn't what we want here in our nation. And most of the people I know, even the people that I know that are extremely liberal, they don't want that. But for some reason, they're not seeing that that's the eventual outcome. So okay. I'm hoping to step in that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of my my second question is, why this and why now? Because, you were college to the military to, and you're also a clinical psychologist. And so, I guess, was there a catalyst? Was there a moment where you're like, I cannot believe this is happening? Like, someone needs to do something, and why not me?
So, watching the riots and, watching Portland literally and figuratively burn, and to see that our elected officials weren't willing to stop it, that they were willing to allow such blatant criminal activity and not prevent harm to the business owners, and to have such hypocrisy in how they were willing to enforce their restrictions that they put in place for safety, right? So it's okay to close down our businesses and close down how our state and our nation is functioning, but it's still okay, even though everything else is closed, for you to go out into the streets in huge mobs and destroy our capital, or not our capital, but our city hall, or our to bomb police cars and to attack citizens and police officers. That to me was the catalyst to say that things are really upside down right now, and we need to right this ship.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's been crazy what we've been witnessing to, and we kind of have a front row seat to it. Mm-hmm. So as you're not explicitly the 6th district, not explicitly in Portland, it sort of gets to Tigard and Beaverton and kind of the outline areas. But what are your thoughts on the newly formed district? Do you think it's beneficial? Do you think it's helpful? Do you think it's a hindrance to the Republican side?
I think I know what you're asking, but let me just clarify. So, do I think it's going to be a hindrance to a more conservative agenda being put into place? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a lot of hope for this district. I see, and not just for this district, I think that we can legitimately take at least 2, if not 3 of these new seats. Not new seats, well, they're all kind of new, right? Because they've all been redrawn. I think that Democrats have overplayed their hand, really. I think there are a lot more people in this state that have a much more conservative leaning idea of who America is and what it is that they want to see out of our nation than where the liberals and the Democratic Party have taken it. I think a lot of people, what I'm hearing a lot of people say is my party has left me. And so, you know, there's I think a really good chance that if we can get our message in a really effective way to the non-affiliated and the independents, then I think we can take a large portion of those votes.
Yeah, my last question, and I wanted to save it for the end because it's sort of like an outro, but I literally wrote, what is your message and how do you get it out to disaffected Democrats and non-affiliated voters? So yeah, what would you like, how do you, what do you say to them? Like you said, and something I say is I think everyone is more conservative than they know, but how do you make that case?
So, you know, I think Portland is a really good example. And I keep going back to Portland because Portland, I think, is a microcosm of what's happening in the rest of our nation. But I think it's also something that we saw here in our state, right? So we saw when those riots were happening that it started to kind of spread out to other urban areas, which because of the leadership they had there, like we saw it here in Salem, I know it was happening in Hillsborough and other places, you know, other metro areas. And so those places had enough common sense really to say, okay, we're not going to allow people to go around destroying our city and we're going to do something about it, right? So they were able to stop it and keep it from spreading further into lasting longer. But if we look at Portland, Portland has taken a nosedive in the last 5 years. And do we really want what we see in Portland to happen to the rest of our state? I would say no, because so many people have left Portland. Portlanders that have been there for a long time, that have watched, you know, that have seen how bad the homelessness is, which homelessness is bad, you know, across our state. But they've started to move out. You know, we saw Portland 5 years ago go from the third most desirable city to, as far as a real estate market, to the 66th. That's huge. That's a huge jump. And we've seen it go from a place of business from the 21st to the 35th out of 50 states. So as far as Oregon is concerned, so we're moving backwards in a lot of these areas. And if we don't have industry, then we can't survive. Like as a state, what happens to our revenue? How do we support all of these programs that people want to see put into place? It doesn't matter what your, whether you have a D or an R next to your name. If there's any program you'd like to see happen, we have to have revenue to make it happen. And we can't do that if we don't have industry. And if businesses leave because we're so unfriendly towards them, or, you know, we keep making really bad choices about policies as far as our natural resource protection, and we keep having additional fires that, you know, are costing loss of agriculture, which agriculture is a $4 billion industry here in Oregon. It's a quarter of our revenue. And so if we don't protect agriculture by having better policies in place that reduce the risk of forest fires, and that's just one piece of it, right? I mean, like there's all other kinds of issues with water use and land domain and a lot of other things as well that we're seeing policies around. But if we don't protect that industry, then we don't have money. And if we don't have money, we don't have programs.
Yeah, I mean, just like you talked about, a microcosm of that is what's happened to the timber industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we have the Portland timbers, but I mean, we don't log as much as we used to. And I think it goes hand in hand with the fires. It's like if you don't thin out the forest, then and we have so much of it federally protected that you can't touch it, and it's literally just gasoline waiting to be sparked.
Exactly. Well, and then because they've burned up so many of the national forest roads, you can't get in there to fight fires.
Yeah.
And you don't clean up the underbrush, you don't thin the forest like you're talking about, you don't have the fire breaks. So these are all things that we used to have in place and we weren't seeing the same kind of fires that we're seeing now. Right now, we have our senators that are proposing a policy that is going to make our water restrictions on the east side of the Cascades even worse. And so, we can't keep promoting, and it really doesn't matter what district you're from. If you're voting for a House congressional member or you're voting for a senator and they're still representing you, they represent all of Oregon. They represent all of America when they're there in Washington, right? So every single one of those votes count. So we can't just think in these really siloed ways of, well, this person just represents my district. We have to think these people are representing all of Oregon and they're representing all of America when they're with their votes. And so,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay.
And so I was actually going to touch on, because this is a federal candidate, it's not just specific to Oregon. So and we touched on sort of the riots down in Portland, but we also have another crisis, and even in parts of your district like Salem, you mentioned, but also across the country, we're seeing drug abuse and mental health issues, and Oregon's almost consistently last in mental health issues, but now I would assume we're sort of near the top per capita of drug issues because it's legal. So those issues are being ignored in the name of compassion. So as a behavioral health professional, how do you see that issue, and what sort of lens can you bring to those issues?
So, I think part of that has to do with what we're doing with kids. So youth in Oregon have twice the rate of depression as adults in Oregon. And we already know, like you just stated, that that mental health prevalence and access to care, we're last in the nation for those things. So I think we need to start by addressing those issues earlier. I think we need to, and for suicidality, those rates are also pretty high. We're towards the lower third in the nation for suicide rates. So we need to address those issues when people are younger. So that way, as they get older, they know how to cope. They know how to manage with life. But I think we also need to stop doing things and I think the issues that we have with the indoctrination in schools are contributing to a lot of the depression that we're having. We're putting a lot of pressure on really young kids to question things that before were always just sort of accepted. And with that, we've seen the prevalence rates of those issues go up. And we also, along with that, have seen issues with suicide and issues with depression and anxiety go up. So, if you have a 5-year-old worried about their carbon footprint, or worried about whether or not they're male or female, that's a lot more pressure on a 5-year-old than they really need to have. When they're really just trying to learn their ABCs and learn how to, count. I mean, in kindergarten, they should be learning how to count to 100, not having to figure out, am I a boy or a girl? So I think it starts there, but it's an issue all throughout. So we need access to care is one issue. So part of that can come by addressing the number, or not the number necessarily, but the types of providers that are allowed to be paneled with Medicare. So at this point, we have 3 levels of providers that are allowed to be paneled with Medicare. You have psychologists, social workers, and psychiatrists. But if you have a marriage and family therapy degree, or if you're a licensed professional counselor, you can't receive that, or you can't accept that type of insurance. But we have a pretty high percentage of people that are on Medicare. So I think those are really simple changes that I think would have huge impacts in the accessibility to care. And, I have a practice. We don't have enough providers to be able to accept everyone that calls us. It would be great if we could, but we just don't. There's so much need. So doing things like peer supports, those are things that could happen in schools. There are also things that could be happening, on college campuses. There are things that could be happening in businesses. There already are really well-validated studies in peer supports and how well they work. There are counties that do some of that, but they're not well-funded programs, and they're not programs that have a lot of I don't think a lot of people know about them. So they might actually have the resources there to step in where other services aren't. And so that's not something that would cost a lot of money. It's not something that would take from something else, but just letting those services be known and getting out that information to people that would be referring, like letting school counselors know.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna, but you're talking about sort of like an AA model.
It's not necessarily like an AA model, but I guess it's similar to that. So you're not necessarily taking someone who's, I guess, in that framework, you would say recovered from depression, but you're taking people that have a lower level of training or education and letting them help people that have a lower acuity of need. So they're not necessarily sitting with the person that's suicidal, but they're sitting with the person who maybe has some issues with anxiety that are causing problems for them. And so those are the types of people that they have a manualized program that they use. And if there's a need for a higher level of service, then they can refer.
Okay. And so aside from, I know Medicare obviously is a federal program, but how do you, how do we, it sounds like those types of support groups, one of the great things about AA is it's free and you don't really, there's no cost and it doesn't. But from sort of like if you were queen for a day, like what would be your way to help to do mental health and, whether it's cost effective or not, I guess is a different issue, but would you mandate treatment for people? Would you, because that's one thing, obviously, like the ACLU is like, oh, you can't take these people and hospitalize them against their will. But some people are like, well, they can't take care of themselves and they're sort of a drain on, and they're injuring themselves essentially, out on the street and exposure. And so I just think that it's one issue that I sort of waffle back and forth on is like, do we mandate treatment? Is that even okay as a conservative? You know what I mean? Like,
well, you can't really mandate mental health care. So in order to benefit from treatment, you have to be engaged with it. You have to be bought into it. So, there's no magic wand when it comes to mental health. Someone has to want it. They have to want to get better because there's just things they have to do in order to get there. You see the same thing with substance abuse. They used to do a whole lot of court mandated substance abuse treatment. And we still do some of it with like DUIs. But if someone doesn't want to have a change in their life, they're not going to make it. And that's just the reality of what happens with mental health care. The mental health care provider isn't a silver bullet, they're a facilitator.
Okay. So, and with, some of the issues we brought up today, if there was like a top three that you are most passionate about, either, staying as it is or something that you're very passionate about wanting to see changed at the federal level, or at least things that you see here in Oregon that you like to have different?
So I think one thing that I'm extremely passionate about is, and this probably has to do with my intelligence background, is our national security. So we just saw our president hand over intelligence data to our enemy. We're seeing with the open borders that we have, we're seeing things like you mentioned crime earlier, and drugs. I've been speaking with sheriffs that are saying, prior to January, we didn't have a problem in our community with meth anymore. But now we're seeing issues with meth just get exponentially worse. We already had a problem with opioids and overdose and deaths because of opioids prior to January. Now we're seeing, in the last 10 months, that has gotten extremely bad. And not only do those issues with drugs that are occurring cause harm to the individual, they're causing harm in our communities. We're seeing things, activity from Mexican cartels and Russian mafia and Chinese mafia in communities that never saw those things before. And so we're seeing a lot of crime related to those issues that have to do with the open borders that we have. So if we know who's coming into our country, we know what they're doing here, and we know where they're at and when they leave, and we know what they're bringing in, then that's one piece of it. The other piece of that is that I think we're going to have a lot of work to do to overcome the intelligence leaks, and not just leaks, but just outright breaches that we've had from our administration. And I would like to know who in our military was supporting those decisions to essentially out our personnel that were in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's really sad, and I often wonder, like, how I feel like there are staples of someone's life or a society that should never be touched by politics. Mm-hmm. Military is one of them. A doctor, a faith, your church. But I don't understand how this is, I guess, a question I hadn't thought of, but given your military background, what is happening with our military, and why do they feel like political appointees rather than people who seems like they're on one team or the other?
And we used to never see that, but we are seeing that in the last few years. And I think it's a question that the military really needs to take a look at and start censoring people. When you have generals say that, I didn't question, it's not my job to question an order. As a young airman, I was taught that you do need to question orders because you're responsible for what you carry out. So if you carry out an unlawful order, it's still unlawful, even if you were told to do it. So that we have people at the highest levels of our military saying that they're not going to question an order and whether or not it's lawful, to me, that's when you get into issues of treason. And so I think we need to really reevaluate, the military needs to really reevaluate who the leaders are and why those leaders are there. You asked about what else I'm passionate about. I started to talk about, the criminal elements that have happened with our open borders. The other pieces of that are human trafficking, which is a huge industry for all of these criminal elements. And we are seeing that increase in our communities here in Oregon. So there was a bust down in Josephine County where there were 130 people found in human slavery. And I think we need to start using that word because that's what it is. It's slavery. It's modern day slavery. And if we are concerned about equity and we're concerned about human life, then we need to take a stand and not allow human slavery to happen anywhere in our nation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So two more things. One is you're running in a primary. How do you differentiate? I mean, this is a little ways out, but how do you differentiate yourself from other Republican candidates?
So, like you mentioned earlier, I have a lot of varied lived experiences. Um, so far, I'm the only veteran who's running. Um, I have a doctorate. I'm a very educated or highly educated woman. And I have shown a commitment to this nation and to our state. I've also, proven to be an effective and a dedicated advocate over a lot of years for people that are underserved. So, I think, with all of that in combination, I think there will be many experiences that I have that most candidates will not have that they can offer to the people of Oregon.
Okay. And well, one thing I just thought of it, if you are elected, Washington is sort of, I mean, at least from our side, I feel like is sort of a dirty place, and there's not much friendship and ally building. It's more of like, who can the whip get to have this vote, and you got to stay on our side. And how do you feel about sort of that boy, I guess that just that it has such a bad reputation, I guess. How do you feel like you can go and sort of make allies with people?
Throughout my life, I've had a lot of practice in learning how to get along with people, even if I don't agree with them. Growing up looking like I did, I didn't see another person that looked like me until I was 24 years old. And so there weren't a lot of communities that just I fit into and was accepted by without doing a lot of work. And so, I think we have to learn to stay unoffended. Most people out there aren't necessarily trying to harm us. They might say or do things, but if we get offended, then we're for sure not going to be able to communicate with them and be able to walk alongside them. And the reality is, we're all Americans. We're all here for this nation. And so you still have to have integrity. You still have to, be solid in your beliefs. And I think having really solid beliefs that you're committed to, so not being taken away from those, but still being able to get along with people and not resorting to some of the, the name calling and all of that kind of stuff, I think are really important things. And I think by just staying unoffended and, approaching people with the love of Christ is still a winning combination.
Yeah, that's great. And last thing, so I'm guessing you got some really good walking shoes, and you're going to be knocking on some doors. What's your 30 second, 60-second speech to just sort of be an inviting presence and let people know how you stand and what you're about?
Yeah. So our constitutional freedoms are paramount to us making this country the greatest thing that it can be. And it's been a document that has lasted the test of time, and that has helped us to have prosperity, and not just for a certain type of person, but for all people. And so if we want to have all people to have opportunity and to succeed in our nation, then we have to protect it.
Great. Well, hey, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren. She's going to handle the audience questions. It looks like we have a couple. So, Lauren, take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, we do have a couple. So I'll just get right into it. So what's your stance on Puerto Rico statehood?
It's a really complex question. And there are a lot of factors that go into that. In the military, I certainly served alongside a number of people that were from Puerto Rico. In my personal life, I have friends that are family to me that are from Puerto Rico. So I know the people of Puerto Rico are mixed on this question as well. And so, there is I don't have a good answer to where I stand on it. I don't feel like I have a good yes or no to it. I think it's a really complex question. Puerto Rico has a lot of needs. They're certainly an important part of America from where they stand, but also, being pretty independent in who they are. And so it's a complex question. I don't know that I have a good answer for that one at this point.
The next question is, if you could accomplish just one thing when you get to Washington, what would it be?
And I did see Alex's question that they voted yes for statehood 3 times. Yes, they have. There's also been, I think, a lot of pretty complex questions, though, as far as what do they offer to the United States, and what do we offer to them, and how do we do that without changing who they are? And so, like I said, I think it's a really complex issue. And so, before I would vote on something like that, I think I would want to talk with my constituents about their feelings on it and what they would want to see happen.
She's a politician already.
But I think that's true, right? Like, it's true. We want to represent the people that have put us there, but we also want to be fair and make sure that we're sticking to our values. And so, I don't know that there's necessarily, like I said, a good answer to that right now.
Sorry, Lauren, I just wanted to say real quick, and another thing that you talk about being unoffended, one thing that our society is great at now is impulse and jumping to conclusions, and I need to be right on this issue right now. So I actually respect that you're like, I may need to learn a little more to so yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So what is your position on our intervention in the Middle East?
As far as what we've done, or what?
Yeah, what we've done, and then pulling troops out of Afghanistan.
So I don't think anyone can look at Afghanistan and say that that was a success in how that was handled. I think most of the country wanted us to come out of Afghanistan. How it happened was truly tragic. And I think we're going to have repercussions from that for years to come. I've mentioned in a few different places that, one primary concern I have for that is our national security because of how that happened. So absolutely, I think that was handled in a very inappropriate way and could have been handled much better. Do we need a presence in the Middle East? I think we absolutely need a presence in the Middle East. Our country became safer because we had a presence in the Middle East. That has happened throughout our history. Every war we fought internationally has been one where we have kept a presence somewhere, and that presence there has kept us safe. you know, Korea, Japan, Germany, you know, pretty much everywhere where we have fought a war, we have continued to have a presence there. It didn't necessarily have to be adversarial. I mean, look at all, well, South Korea anyway, you know, all of those people are now allies with us. So I think there's ways that we can maintain a presence in the Middle East and continue to protect our national security in a way that is good for America and good for the people that we're allies with.
Yeah.
And hopefully that got to the heart of that question. If not, let me know.
Yeah, I'm sure if there's a follow-up. Oh, it did. Okay, cool. So another question is, if you could accomplish just one thing when you get to Washington, what would it be?
To go through every bill that has occurred in the last 2 decades that has taken away individual rights and states' rights, and revisit those with a different Congress. I think we need to absolutely get back the freedoms we've lost.
Yeah, for sure. And so one thing a lot of GOP voters question is election integrity. How do you approach that with voters in need?
So I'm just reading the question again. So, you know, there are a lot of people out there that have a lot of theories on how we protect our elections that are a lot smarter and much more knowledgeable about that issue than I am. And I'm always wanting to learn from people that have that knowledge and experience. But what I think we can't do is just give up. We can't just stop voting. And I hear people saying, well, my vote isn't going to count anyway. And that's how we got into the position we're in Oregon, right? Because people saying my vote isn't going to count anyway, and they just stop voting. And so we have to make sure that people still engage, you know, regardless of what happens with our voting system. We have to keep people engaged. They have to know that what we do is going to matter. And we do see it happening. You know, we see it happening in small communities, and we see it happening in bigger ones. You know, we've seen seats flip. You know, even in this last election, we saw seats in our House flip, where there weren't, and the Senate. So, you know, we're seeing it happen on every level. So we can't just give up. We can't stop fighting. You know, I'm also hearing people say, you know, I've had this and this neighbor, I've had this family member, you know, just leave, you know, just pack up and leave Oregon because they feel like there's no hope. And my message is there absolutely is hope, and we can win this state back.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to ask is, why did you decide to run for this seat, for a district seat? Why not try something smaller just to dip your toes into politics?
Yeah, so, you know, I've been around politics for a long time. I've been an advocate for seniors and people with disabilities since 2014, and advocating with lawmakers both in Oregon, within certain communities, as well as at the state level, as well as federally. So even though I've not run for public office, I've been around politics for a long time and been involved in it from an advocacy standpoint. And so that's part of the answer. The other answer is that this is where I felt led to be.
Yeah. All right. So that's all the questions we have. Is there any last thoughts or comments you want to say before we wrap up this interview?
You know, I'm really encouraged that so many young people are getting involved. I was in love with politics when I was, you know, in college. And for me, it wasn't something that I stopped loving. It was something that my life just took me in a different direction. And so when I became a psychologist, I didn't stop caring about policy or stop caring about what was happening in my community or in my country. And so I'm really encouraged that there's so many young people that have such good common sense and are able to recognize and that some of the education that they've seen really was indoctrination and not necessarily truth, and are willing to take a stand and to get out there and help other people recognize that too. So thank you guys.